Before we go to getting your preferences by Zoom poll, I want to hear from each facilitator if there are any questions or outstanding issues that came up in your discussions. So I'm going to go through the 9 facilitators very quickly, and then if there are questions, we'll try to deal with them very quickly. We've been answering some individual questions, and I see some questions are coming up more than once. So let's hear from the facilitators. Can I hear from group 1, please? Are there any outstanding questions?
There was not so much an outstanding question as an issue that if option C is taken, that the Assembly, what would be the Assembly's role in having the text of any new legislation agreed? There was a question submitted, and the response that came back raised that.
I can answer that question very quickly, because the Assembly will have no role in drafting legislation. What we do is you will be sending recommendations to the Oireachtas, and it will be for them to formulate, with the help of the Attorney General and with the agreement of the government, they will decide what is the wording that would go to a referendum. So what you need to be thinking about is how can you send a clear message to the Oireachtas on what you want to see changed if you want change. But you will not be coming back, and you will not be consulted on the actual wording of what goes to a referendum, except that you will then have a vote. So you'll be able to vote and see coming through all the machinery, hopefully something very close to what you recommended. Was there anything else from group 1?
No, that was it.
Thank you very much.
Experts dealt with that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Group 2?
Thank you, Chair. The citizens of the group also had a similar question that the citizens at room 1 asked there, and in relation to the legal questions, those have been sent on.
Okay, thank you very much. Group 3?
Yes, Chair. There was one question from group 3, and this is the terminology used. Instead of option C, could the replacement be inserted into the section of the Constitution on guiding principles?
I think the answer to that is yes, it could. Okay, do we have an answer?
No, because it's just come in, but Tom or Laura or
something. I will check this, and we'll maybe ask one of our legal experts to come on in a moment. But my understanding is that you could put the same provision into Article 45. It would then serve as guidance to the government, but it would not have, it would not be interpreted by the courts, because they do not have a role in terms of interpreting Article 45. But maybe Tom or Laura, could you just come on and clarify that?
Sure, I can answer that, Catherine. It's not that the courts don't have a role in interpreting Article 45. It's just that you can't assert rights on the basis of Article 45. So if you wanted to put it into Article 45, it would be having very much an aspirational effect. So you're saying to the Oireachtas, when you are passing legislation, you should take notice of this. But a person can't then go to court and say, I have a right to something on the basis of Article 45.
Thanks very much, Laura. That's very clear, I think. Can we move to group 4?
Yes, Chair, thank you. We didn't have so many questions, other than I think the citizens in group 4 suggested that the third option on the ballot paper be expanded to include not just gender neutral, but also definite state obligations to support carers, and to expand the definition of carers to non-family carers also. And also, if yes to option C, whether or not the Assembly could introduce legislation or recommend that legislation be introduced to give respite to carers.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there we would be getting, it sounds more like writing legislation, because the more detail you try to put into the Constitution, the more rigid it becomes. And in fact, what we are doing now is trying to change rigid definitions that have become outdated in the view of many. So, but that we take that view on board as well. Thank you very much. Group 5, please.
Thanks, Chair. The citizens in Group 5 didn't have any questions at this time.
Thank you very much. Group 6.
Thank you, Chair. We had 2 questions which we sent on to the panel. One was, who has the authority of the wording of the legislation? And I think you've already addressed that. And 2, if we make the recommendation to delete and replace, do we get an opportunity to request that the government commit to provide support and care? So there were our 2 questions and we have put them forward. Thank you.
On the second question, today we're just focusing on the Constitution because we're trying to establish our way of working. But in March and in April, we will be looking at a lot more detailed recommendations, which we would propose, we would suggest to the government to make through legislation or through policy. And I think a lot of those issues would be better dealt with in legislation and in policy. So, you know, this is not the only time we have to discuss issues like care inside and outside the home, respite care, etc. All of that will come in the next 2 meetings.
Thank you.
Thank you. Group 7, please.
Thank you. Earlier on in the discussion, a question was put forward to the advisory group, just in relation to question B, if something was deleted and not replaced, does this create a vacuum? And the answer that was received back was no, a vacuum is not created. So the citizens just had a follow-up question in relation to this. If there is no vacuum created from deleting Article 41.2, what is the benefit to replacing this with something else?
Laura, I think you covered that a little bit in your video, so maybe I'll ask you to come in on this again, please.
That's a kind of a tricky one, actually, because it would depend on how you decided to replace the article. So it's quite possible that if you simply replaced it with something that recognised carers with a gender neutral language, it's quite possible it wouldn't have any difference than what's there at the moment. If you did want to create some sort of concrete right arising out of it, you would have to have more prescriptive language involving some sort of a duty on the government.
Thanks very much, Laura. Group 8, please.
Good morning, Chair. We had a couple of questions. The citizens had a couple of questions. They've been forwarded on to the legal team. One thing that came up, it's really a question for the Chair rather than the legal team. If the citizens vote to delete and change the wording of the Constitution, is there a time frame for this process to take place and possibly leading to a referendum? Is there an agreed time frame that the Chair has agreed with the government?
No, there is no agreed, excuse me, there is no agreed time frame. What the government has committed to do is to give a reaction to each recommendation that this Assembly will make. As you know, the Constitution, the Convention on the Constitution already recommended to amend the Women in the Home Clause, and that was never followed through with a referendum because it was never possible to agree in government what should be put in its place. So, but as I've said to you before, this Assembly has the power of persuasion, and that is what we are doing when we will be formulating recommendations back to the Oireachtas. But you have not been elected, so you cannot replace the elected government. What you can do is send them strong messages and clear messages. And I think the fact that Ireland has acted upon recommendations from mostly from previous assemblies should also encourage you to be clear.
That's super, thank you.
Thank you. And Group 9, please.
There were no particular questions arising, Chair,
Okay.
There was a broad discussion again in the context of the information that Laura just shared there. So it was more about what would the text or what would the impact of the change in text if option C was adopted.
Okay. Well, thank you all for that feedback. That's very helpful. And it's interesting to see that some groups had similar questions. So I hope with the clarifications that we've given you, I'd like now to check if you feel ready to answer question 1 as it was set out in the paper that you've received. So Lena, could you put the wording up on the screen, please? So what we want to hear from you now is, are you happy that this would be the question that we would ask you to vote on in April? So this would be the question that would be on the ballot paper in April. I think you should be ready to give us your reactions on this now. Can you please now, Darren, I think let's go to the poll, and can you please tell us your answer? Okay, everybody has indicated their preference. So can we see the results now, please? Okay, that's a very clear, large number of votes in favor of yes, this is the right question. 12% obviously have doubts or different reasons, so that's fine. We register that, and we will move on now to question 2. This time you're being asked whether you agree that the 2 options we have suggested to you should be on the ballot paper in April, and you have 45 minutes for this question. So we're going to put you back in the breakout groups, and I'll see you again in 45 minutes. And if there are questions from groups, please send them to us. We'll try to reply quickly to you. And if there are questions to be discussed by the whole assembly, then we'll take them when you come back in 45 minutes time. Thanks a million. See you later.